Worst weddings you've been to and what happened? Went to a dry wedding. That's not just a description of the drink situation, but the entire affair in general. It was in a tent, in summer, in the South. Dress code specified men to wear jackets during the ceremony. Women couldn't have overly exposed shoulders or low cuts. Linen was not allowed. Ceremony itself took just shy of 2 hours and included multiple speeches by the bride, groom, and the minister. Both fathers sang gospels. The best man played acoustic guitar for like 10 minutes. The guests had to reconfigure the tent after the ceremony for their reception while the wedding party did photos. It was still summer. We found out there were assigned seats when the wedding planner went table to table and called out who was to sit where. We would be released to the buffet by the bride or groom, table by table. They stopped to chat with every table or take pics, etc. No dancing. The location was by a lake with a dock and patio area down at the water. We were to stay in the tent. More speeches were given. The bride and groom paused, releasing people to eat for each speech. The sweet tea was weak. The bride's father gave a long speech in which he only mentioned his daughter twice. Both times were in reference to giving his son-in-law healthy baby boys. The best man played guitar again. The cake was in the sun. The buffet was a dry barbecue that the groom and his new father-in-law smoked the day before. All brisket. Sides were just mac and cheese and salad. I left between when my table got released and the cake cutting. Partially because I was starving. Partially because I had 100% sweat through my entire suit. And partially because I'd arrived 6 hours ago. My plus one, a family friend, and I went with my mom to an Applebee's or something that was close by. At least a dozen of the tables there were other guests we recognized. I swear I saw a woman cry when they brought her a margarita. We heard that the reception continued late into the evening, including the bride and groom asking the remaining guests to all share a memory that they have with them. They spelled my name wrong in the thank you card. I can forgive a lot, but weak sweet tea washing down dry barbecue? May the mosquitoes always find you. Story 2. It was in the middle of nowhere, held at a country club which I don't think had ever hosted an event of any kind. There was one motel in the town. There were no rooms left, so we planned to drive 3 to 4 hours there, see the wedding, leave when they got to the part of the reception when the dancing and partying started. We arrived, went in, and there was hardly anyone there. We make our way to where they're going to have the ceremony in some courtyard, and the chairs are all blowing away, and there are some staff trying to chase them down. But there had to have been a couple of hundred chairs, and there couldn't have been more than 20 or 30 of us. I don't even know who rented all the rooms. That's what I kept thinking about. We sat and were almost amused in a horrified kind of way. But no one else showed up, and the start time came and went uncomfortably, without anyone but the few guests showing up. Turns out there was no wedding. Someone cheated on someone the night before, and there was a big fight that morning. Thing is, I never really learned the details. At that moment, all that happened was someone from the venue finally came out and said, sorry, in the most awkward way, that we should go home because the entire thing was being canceled. Story 3. Crazy one that I attended. My wife's friend from another part of her life. She worked with this girl for about 6 months, 5 years prior. They communicated, pre-internet, by phone every couple of months and got together once or twice a year, even though we lived about 10 miles away. She was living with this hardcore, poorly educated. He was a hard worker, but was fairly mean. Add this, she had a kid with this guy who was 2 at the time of the wedding. We were invited, about a week out, Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock at a restaurant. I had a lacrosse game, so I got there about 4:15. Nothing had started except for the drinking. 25 guests in all. Bride, groom, and best man are all hammered. 5-minute ceremony. Reception was just more the same. Minimal amount of food. Best man's speech was probably the inspiration for the Steve Buscemi character in The Wedding Singer. This wedding was in the same era, mid-80s. The speech was about how Greg took care of him, letting him live with a newly married couple, and his main hope for the couple going forward is that they wouldn't argue anymore. It was the most intoxicating wedding I've ever seen. And the night wasn't over. They were flying out of BWI Airport the next morning, and the bride suggested that everyone come to the hotel for more partying. We went. As we get into the lobby, another bride was standing off to the side as her husband was checking in. This intoxicated wench starts going off on the other bride. You're an ugly wench. I'm the good-looking bride. The other girl wasn't having any of it and started in on her, super close to a real fight. Let's go, both my wife said at the same time. Story 4. I went to what I can only describe as a redneck wedding a few years ago. Groom is 24. His bride-to-be was like 42 with 2 kids over the age of 18. so a weird dynamic to begin with. The ceremony was at a public park under a gazebo. The groom's parents were visibly not down with the wedding. It was hot as heck, and there was enough food for maybe 30% of the guests. We were told the reception was at the local Elks Lodge, which, while not very extravagant, at least had a bar and reception hall. Those were not rented out, however, just the pool. So you had the usual very old, very intoxicated clientele of a rural southern Elks Lodge who were doing their thing, and then 4 people, bride, groom, and 2 of their friends down in the pool all passing around a bottle of Jack. I left immediately, and they got divorced 6 months later. Story 5. Worked at a wedding as a caterer where the bride and groom were mixed race. The families apparently were not fans of each other, and the mothers developed a jealous mentality of the wedding. If someone got something, the other had to have it too, or better. We got prepped by the event planner that we couldn't serve one set of parents first. We had to serve them simultaneously, or else one would perceive the other as getting one over on them. At one point, we had to move the bride's family table a bit due to some obstruction, but not that easy. We also had to move the groom's family table as well, so no one wasn't any closer than the other to the sweetheart table. We had to set the parents in the same spot at the table so they both had the same view of the sweetheart table, but not directly looking at each other. I even made sure the portioning was the same and that none of the plates presented any better than the others. Exhausting. Story 6. We went to a friend's wedding about 20 years ago in a sweet little town. Hotel was lovely and also the site of the reception. The wedding was early, at around lunchtime in a big French Catholic cathedral. It was about 95 degrees outside and the church was not air-conditioned. The wedding was a full mass plus actual wedding ceremony. We were starving, hot and thirsty by the time it ended. There were cocktails at the hotel while photos were being taken, which took 3 hours. We didn't want to eat because we were expecting dinner. Everyone took their seats, did the usual speeches and such. There was never any food. We left and ordered pizza in our room. The following day, there was a gift opening with brunch. The brunch was held before the bride and groom and their families, not for guests. It was a very hungry weekend. Story 7. So many speeches. They had both sets of parents, of course. Maid of honor, best man, of course. But then every other member of the wedding party also had a speech. There were 6 members per side. I think some aunts and uncles also spoke. Thankfully, they were mostly after dinner was served, so people weren't starving. But the bar was closed during speeches and the table wine ran out very quickly. The dinner and speeches lasted over 3.5 hours. By the time they ended and the dancing began, a large portion of the crowd just left. Didn't hang around for the first dance or cake, etc. Second worst. The bride and groom left immediately after dinner. Pretty sure they were waiting to have intimacy until after marriage. No actual post-dinner dancing, etc. They had a DJ, but he wasn't needed. Everyone just milled around for a while and then left. I wonder if they had a speech limit for the wedding party. Maybe something like, keep it under 5 minutes or we'll cut the mic. Story 8. Attending an in-law's wedding. Morning ceremony, so they serve breakfast. Not a nice breakfast. Think conference breakfast at the Hampton Inn. Rubbery eggs, cold pancakes. Each table got 1 bottle of sparkling wine for 1 toast. I got a text message the morning of the wedding. Turns out the bride's sketchy cousin was supposed to be her DJ. In shocking news, he bails. She asks me to DJ her reception, as well as play the music for her ceremony. I learned the ceremony music 5 minutes before the ceremony and wing it with my iPod and a speaker. I am then tasked with DJing her reception, including music for their introduction, introducing speakers, starting the toasts, the whole shebang. I received exactly 1 thank you from that entire side of the family. I have since divorced my ex and all of his awful, ungrateful family. Story 9. Mine. I didn't like my dress at all. I wasn't happy with the bridesmaids' dresses. I wasn't really happy with any of it, because no one listened to a thing I actually wanted. The dog passed away the day before. 2 of my bridesmaids just didn't bother to turn up. I had a severe chest infection. If I could go back in time, I'd have gone to the registry office with 2 people and my husband, got married, and then spent a fortune on the dress I wanted and a really good photographer. Got amazing photos and then went on a 3-week honeymoon. We're still married almost 20 years later, so there's that. The second worst was a friend. We all stood there asking her if she was sure she really wanted to marry him. Her attitude towards the entire thing was off. He was like, meh, I'll do this, and meh, that's good enough. They had nothing in common. The morning after the wedding, she came in at 6 a.m. I had all the kids with me as I was sober and on child-minding duty. I got her daughter and headed home. I remember telling my husband how annoyed I was when we spent money when they'd be divorced in 5 years. They managed 6, but has separated after 4. Wow, that's a lot of stress for one day. Story 10. So, my wedding. I apologize in advance. I'm writing this on my phone and we'll jump from event to event. My now ex-wife wanted an extravagant wedding. I didn't, but went with it for her. Originally, her parents offered to either buy us a house or pay for this wedding, and she chose the wedding. She was a total bridezilla. She insulted both of our families at the rehearsal dinner, forced all grandparents to wear specific clothing she picked, ordered her choice of food for everybody, regardless of what they wanted. She ordered a salad for my overweight relative. We had 250 guests, 23 of whom were mine to invite. Everyone else was from her list. Her father was an elected official, so literally half the guests were people her dad worked with that neither of us knew. She filled the registry with gifts that were way too expensive, so most people gave cash instead. That part I was okay with. Her gift to me was a boudoir photo shoot, which I found out she sent to her ex-boyfriend as well as me. Oh, he was at the wedding too, but I was unaware of their past relationship at the time. She cheated on me with him the day after the ceremony because an emergency caused us to reschedule our honeymoon, and she was upset with me. Long story short, don't get married just because you have a kid together. And don't mess with crazy. It messes you back and intentionally leaves the evidence at home. I've been happily divorced for 9 years now, but she still takes every opportunity she can to attempt to ruin my life. She still can't believe that I left her over her numerous and continued affairs she had over the 3 years we were married. Story 11. The wedding was fine, wonderful, but one of the groomsmen, who was my friend, gave me some gummies during the reception and I was as a kite. A couple was there. People who I knew from work and the woman's daughter, who was like 12. I knew from a different friend that this girl had tried to end herself months earlier and had severe mental health issues. Anyway, that little girl comes over to me and asks if I'll go outside with her. I say of course, thinking maybe she needs help with something. I go outside and she leads me a little ways away to a swing. I sit in a brick wall nearby as she swings. She starts telling me all about her tormentors at school, how she wants to hurt them, how she thinks she has demons inside her and she'll never be a good person, how she's afraid her mom wants her gone. All this stuff. I'm not super good at comforting people, but I tried. The mom and mom's boyfriend walked past. I figured they were just checking on their kid. Later I found out they just wanted to have intimacy outside behind the building. They didn't care at all that their kid was outside with me. The mom made fun of the kid the entire time, talking about certain delusions she had or different personalities she's had. I couldn't stand being around the parents anymore and had to leave the wedding. The little girl told me that she thought it was an angel sent to her. I'm still friends with the couple who actually got married, but that other couple I stay away from. There's even more crap about them I know about, but I won't say here. I feel really bad for that little girl and I hope she gets some actual help. Story 12. It was the now ex-wife's 2 best friends. Great couple. They were amazing. The wedding ceremony was fine enough, in that it wasn't memorable in the least. Ex-wife neglects to tell me that we're camping for the night before and prep. I like camping, but not so much when I need to walk through a muddy field to shower in a pay shower, then try to keep my suit without mud. The good news is that the entire wedding party was also camping in a muddy field, so I wasn't the only one who was dirty. Ex-wife's most recent ex is also part of the wedding party, so she ditches me to hang with him. There's no one I know at the reception, other than the couple and the ex-wife. Dry wedding, but that wasn't that bad other than the lack of sociality for so many strangers. Stepdad of the bride is going to lead us to the reception. Pre-smartphone era. All is well, until he gets on the highway and takes off at over 100 miles per hour. After hitting 80 miles per hour, I refuse to continue to accelerate. Eventually, I pull over until we see another wedding guest who doesn't want to drive, almost double the posted speed limit. This became my problem for choosing not to follow the lunatic. As far as I know, they're still together. I hope so. They were cool, but I'll happily never see any of those people ever again in my life. Story 13. Went to a wedding of a couple that we had no idea were extremely religious. No drinks, no dancing. There was a string quartet that played during the sad happy hour while pictures got taken, etc. But they left as dinner was being served and no more music after. A crappy magician did a short, maybe 20 to 30 minute stage act as the cake was being served. Absolutely no traditional stuff like tossing the bouquet or anything that would somehow remotely be considered sinful. And lots of prayers. The only plus of the evening was that we got seated with extended cousins of the bride's family who spent the entire time messing around with the bride's mom and dad. telling stories of the crazy fundamentalist Christian stuff they had done to their kids. They were barely married when she left him. The last we heard from her, she was living with two guys who were both at least 10 years older than her and was quite proud of splitting her time between their two beds. Story 14. My maternal uncle and his wife. The whole wedding was a crap show from the start. The dresses. The bride's mother made the bridal party dresses, which, unfortunately, ended up looking like a toddler made them. The bridal party was charged $300 to $400 for each dress, because that's what you'd pay at David's Bridal for them. Pretty sure David's bridal dresses are professionally made and look like it. I was supposed to be a junior bridesmaid and had my own dress made by her. She forgot it. So I was out of place in nice clothes and the bride's mother complained the whole time. My mom's dress was too small because the mother of the bride told my mom to lose weight before the wedding. And when she didn't, it was her fault it didn't fit. Mom was pregnant, so losing weight wasn't going to happen. The maid of honor's dress actually was a wedding gown. Mother of the bride and maid of honor insisted and the bride backed down after being threatened with no wedding paid for by her parents. The groomsmen were all hungover and it was obvious that a few were The maid of honor fainted repeatedly during the wedding and things had to be stopped. She refused medical attention each and every time and somehow felt better when it was clear all attention was on her. Finally, right before the bride and groom spoke their vows, the bride hissed at the groom if he ever divorced her, she'd take him for everything he had. She repeated the threat when they had their children after each birth and added she'd take his children away from him. Story 15. A recent one. Wasn't a horror story, but it was bad, because I felt for the groom and bride. A lot of stuff didn't go their way. They were stressed, and even afterwards that night, they kept calling it a crap show. Being married myself, I didn't want them to look back immediately and just think that. It rained, and they wanted the ceremony to be outdoors. We were prepared to have it in light to medium rain, but not heavy rain. The best man didn't have his rental delivered. Not his fault, just a miscommunication. A lot of things were out of the couple's control, and unfortunately, without a dedicated day of wedding planner, the ultimate decision-making always fell on them. A lot of people were helpful, but no one person was the authority to decide, lead, or organize people. Even the execution of their plans. A lot of it was the groom and bride manually doing such things themselves. Not because no one wanted to help, but because they alone really knew what had to be done and exactly how. And when it didn't go right, they just had to decide, move on, and then relay that information to 100 people. One thing about the rain, they bought 100 or so clear umbrellas from Amazon, because they wanted all the guests to be identical and look pretty in the rain, for pictures, etc. Unfortunately, the umbrellas were cheap as hell, crappy factory made, and once they unboxed them, we could see they were breaking easily. So you have many people telling friends and family that, no, you can't use your legit sturdy umbrella that you bought from home. Take this cheap one and good luck. I literally saw person after person opening an umbrella and it immediately breaking the same way. Once we were finally holding the ceremony in light to medium rain, you had maybe 50% holding the umbrellas with two hands because they broke, 40% not using any umbrellas at all, and 10% defectors who just didn't care and used their own. No one was really being disrespectful to the couple either. It was just setback after setback after setback, and their whole schedule was dissolving before their eyes. They still got married, and had smiles all around, but yeah, at the end of the night, they called the day a crap show. So my advice, hire a day of wedding planner, or at least put someone else in charge of everything so the only thing they're focused on is getting married. Story 16. I was invited to a coworker's wedding at a really nice country club. Both of them were New Yorkers, and the bride was a very strong, confident, no BS kind of woman. The priest who was supposed to officiate the wedding fell ill, so the church sent in a backup or relief priest. Didn't know that was a thing. Dude starts the ceremony and proceeds to launch into this whole speech about how, according to the Bible, the wife is supposed to be subservient to the man and take care of making his meals and keeping the house clean, etc., etc. It was some straight out of the 1950s BS. We all knew the bride well and watched in amazement as she managed to keep herself together, but we could tell she was absolutely fuming. After the ceremony ended and she ran off to cry, her whole family, including her father and brothers, had the priest cornered, and I legitimately thought they were going to roughen up the guy. Story 17. I attended my mother's third wedding in South Lake Tahoe, Nevada. I must have been about 20 at the time. The wedding was held in one of those silly Vegas-style chapels that was a little bit bigger than a closet. Nevertheless, it had pews, and the owner really tried to make it look like a traditional church, albeit much, much smaller. My siblings and I, crammed into this little pew, were already mildly chuckling about the cheesiness of it all, when out comes the officiant, a burnt-out hippie guy in a choir robe. That's when our laughs started to become audible. What tore it wide open, though, was when the hippie pastor solemnly lifted up the white dais's top and pressed play on his little Radio Shack cassette player. What spilled forth was Wagner's bridal chorus, sounding as if it were coming out of a tin can. It was all too much for me and my siblings. We were overcome with laughter that just couldn't be stifled. My mother and her groom looked slightly confused. The hippie pastor looked offended, as if his service was as sober and dignified as the proceedings at Westminster Abbey. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 18. Met some friends working at a yearly nerd event. I was younger than them. They were in their 20s when we met. I turned 14 that day. We bonded for years, spending every summer together. When I was 19 or 20, their ringleader got married. It was kind of a surprise. She had dated the same guy for 4 years, broken up with him, and sometime later courthouse married his childhood friend after less than a year of dating. It was messy. Bride and I had a mutual friend, C. C had volunteered to make custom coats and dresses for the bridal party, neo-Victorian or steampunk wedding, as her gift. C had been on and off dating the bridesman of honor for years. Neither was perfect, but he had some obvious control issues and a personality issue of some kind. They broke up for good very shortly before the wedding, but the bride told him to make it work. C did. Man of honor, though, was another story. I had met him a year or so prior when the bride decided to try to hook me up with him at a party. The couple had broken up. I was barely 18 and was just excited to see many friends off-season. I brought a date and did not know I was being presented as a possible mate to a strange man. He looked like a member of Smash Mouth who had been booted from the band and now worked at GameStop in his late 20s. His entire sense of humor was quoting Family Guy. He was deeply not my type on every level, so I politely left to play lifeguard at the indoor pool. I was a very responsible, non-drinking teen. Eventually, the man of honor sauntered in, hammered, and declared that I was too hot for him to talk to sober. I laughed, pulled my friend aside, and told her to never try that again. Hadn't seen him since. At the wedding, he had obviously pre-gamed the ceremony and was visibly and audibly upset. I was furious his ex was there, mad to be wearing something she had made and making a scene. The venue was 15-plus floors off the ground, and he kept wandering out to the balcony, climbing over the railing and threatening to jump. After a few repeat performances, the bride told everyone she didn't care what he did and to move on with the party. I decided I didn't want to deal with the police, so I trotted out to the balcony, put on my dumbest voice, batted my eyelashes, and started asking him questions about hobbies. Eventually, he clambered back over the railing and followed me inside, where he proceeded to do the worm. I hope, it wasn't clear, and continued drinking. After the ceremony, the bride told her friends that she hated the groom's family and encouraged us to play rocky bands until they left. I realized at that moment that maybe I was witnessing a marital mistake, but there was cake and I had to wait for my ride to go home, so we played a rock band. Man of honor left to sleep it off. Groom's best man tried to cheat on his fiancée with me, and the bride encouraged it. Bride and groom had a few years of marital bliss before she started cheating on him, both in-game and IRL, with a guy in their D&D group. Then cheated on that dude with a guy she met on World of Warcraft. Story 19. Summer in California. Wedding was at a cute little church, which was double booked, so the wedding I went to put an arch up in the parking lot and did the ceremony there. Both sets of grandmothers fainted from the heat. The bride's grandmother went first. Somebody caught the groom's grandma. The bride's 98-year-old grandma went to the hospital but ended up being okay. We went off to the reception in a different location. Every one of the groom's friends and the bride's family acted like goddamn animals with inappropriate jokes, hooting like monkeys, shouting out explicit acts. The bride and groom left early and went to their hotel room. The groom's friends and bride's cousins went under their window to laugh, yell, and listen in on the wedding night to give the groom flack in his performance. I was 8 and still vividly remember how wildly uncomfortable of a crap show that wedding was. My mother refused to let us hang out with that side of the family again. Story 20. She bragged for years about how her father was the general manager of some prestigious hotel. Then they announced the wedding would be there. The wedding was at the hotel's banquet hall, which had the partitions to separate business meetings. There was a tiny arch that had fake flowers on it in the front of the room. That was the only decoration. The officiant had never met the bride or the groom. She was 15 minutes late and the sermon was her reading off the sheet. When I asked why about topic 1, he stated, "Read his answer. Repeat for her each question from the online form they filled out." It lasted about 15 minutes. The reception was cookie cutter, and the best man and maid of honor winged it with their speeches, and it was obvious. The bar turned out to be a cash bar, though we were told it was an open bar, so nobody really brought any cash. Her father had promised to have another room reserved for the after party. We got there, and it's another similar room. Again, no decorations. And it had 3 bags of Doritos and some pretzels, and we sat in chairs and talked for about a half hour. Most of the people canceled their hotel reservations because nobody was drinking, so we're fine to simply drive home. Story 21. Went to my wife's male cousin's wedding. We flew from across the country to go. My wife and the cousins weren't particularly close, but we rarely see my wife's family, and they were all attending, so we decided to make a trip of it. The bride had a nervous breakdown and canceled the wedding 3 days prior, after we already flew in, then came to her senses and put it back on a day after the original date. The groom's family is well off and paid for the originally canceled wedding, and then managed to get a small winery to handle the second wedding at the last second. About 90% of the guests still showed up to the restarted second wedding, many changing plans and even flights. The bride was in despair at the wedding and proceeded to get on the microphone and let loose a tirade and attack the wedding venue, who threw together a really nice reception that would have been fine had it been the original plan, but more miraculous was that they pulled it off in 36 hours. Oh, and the venue owners and their family were right there serving drinks and snacks. She then made fun of my nephews, my wife's sister-in-law who was suffering from postpartum depression and had gained some weight, another relative's autistic kid, another relative who was overweight. She then spent the rest of the night sneaking off getting blazed with her trashy bridesmaids. Story 22. The bride's grandparents were known to be extremely conservative, and they picked a church. The bride and groom came in from Alaska, so they had little to do with the planning. The first thing we noticed was a banner on the church. Convert the lost, no matter the cost. Inside the church was the entire catalog of Focus on the Family and other televangelist stuff. The location rarely saw hot days, so usually didn't need any sort of AC. This was, however, early August. The place was packed solid, and there wasn't even a single fan. The few windows that did open provided no crosswind. There weren't pew, just heavy cushioned chairs that linked together that made moving difficult. The room was hot before the services started and getting worse. This church made the wedding into a sermon. We didn't know the groom, but we picked up that he was not entirely there. The minister made the point of the service that the bride was nothing but a rib. Not the head, just a rib. Protected and close to the heart, but not ever to be the one to call the decisions in the relationship. This went on forever. The temperature rose and rose because they were backing the dinner in the basement. 4 ovens on, cooking lasagna for 150 people, and all that heat was going up to a room with no ventilation, and the hottest day of the year. We were finally released so they could rearrange the upstairs for the reception. The bride had wanted to have the attendees greet the new couple with thousands of bubbles. The tiny soap and loop thingies did not work at all, so she stood over the crowd of people baking in the sun and just blowing furious into these loops and getting soap fingers. People tried to escape, but we were all called back in the church. The pews were unlinked and put around tables, but because these were heavy fabric chairs, they were all hard to get in or get out of. These were a fire hazard. The last thing you wanted to sit on a hot day. Each table had a tiny, clear boot with floating glitter in them. My guess was that someone was making fun of Goldschlager, but I was wrong. The bride had said she wanted a fairy tale wedding and on a budget of $0. This book was as close as a Cinderella slipper as we were going to get. Dinner was served, and when the chairs and tables were so packed in, movement in and out was not going to happen. Plates were passed overhead that made sure everyone's food was messed up. Then the testimonials started. There were 3 types. The groom tried so hard and was never a burden. The bride is so fat. Remember when she ate a whole pie or cake by herself? Life is going to be tough. You're good people for doing this because Jesus tells you to. And when it goes terrible, just pray to Jesus. It wasn't a celebration for some. It was like a funeral for those 2 people fulfilling an obligation. It really showed that the generation before were stuck in loveless marriage and were afraid of hell. Then the father of the bride told the best wedding story ever. He told how the bride and groom met. The father told how a disgruntled ex-employee of the hospital his wife and daughter worked at came in with a weapon, mowing down anyone. The father told with glee how the guy went room to room with coroners reporting details of the wounded to make sure we all knew. He told about his wife locking a door and a doctor who played possum tried to get in. This went on entirely too long, and when he was told to move it along, he just dropped in that the groom was added theater security in the weeks afterward. This happening was the greatest thing that ever happened to the father, and he wasn't even there. Others declined to follow that, so the minister then went on to tell us about those that go to hell. Dinner is over and time for the reception. This was at a bomb shelter. One entrance, you went in, it was dark and there was nowhere to go. The family had a PA system and they sang Bible songs together as entertainment. They were blocking the entrance or exit, so you had to go past into a dark concrete bunker. Realize you couldn't see things except for the singer and then run the gauntlet to get out into the heat again. The PA system was a single guitar amp speaker, so it was too loud and every song sounded exactly the same. Dry reception as well. I considered being the hero and buying drinks on the way out and realized I have done my duty, so I just left. Story 23. It was a wedding where the bride and groom lived far away from their families and everyone, including me, had to fly in. The mother-in-law wasn't too happy with her son marrying the bride. Wedding went off pretty well and the reception was going okay. But the mother-in-law had a stank face and was audibly complaining. Then during speeches, the bride and groom stopped to thank people that helped with the setup and decorations, etc. The mother-in-law was mad that she wasn't thanked, for some reason. She ended up causing a major scene where she physically attacked her son while screaming at the bride and groom. Her entire side of the family left the wedding reception, which was half the people there. Overall, the people that were left made the most of it, but the bride and groom were visibly shaken and left shortly after. They ended up getting a divorce a few years later. Story 24. My own wedding. From the planning up until the marriage crumbled. First things first. My ex was a huge mama's boy. Her son could do no wrong, ever. Second, he had a drinking habit. I knew it before I agreed to marry him, but thought I would be able to change him. His mother had to plan the whole wedding. From the god-awful plastic bouquets to the ham on the buffet table and dark smoke-filled Veterans Hall. It was decorated with pink and white balloons and streamers. Of course, no effort on her part. The wedding was in his hometown and my family traveled to attend. My mother begged me not to marry the narcissist the night before the wedding. This was related to his intoxicated and obnoxious behaviors at the wedding rehearsal dinner. But I loved him. We married the next day, and of course, his whole family was intoxicated and made spectacles of themselves. The best man drove his car in a ditch and sent the wedding cake flying into the dashboard and vents. Of course, it was everyone's fault, but he was in the back seat. Needless to say, this didn't last. I always thought I needed a do-over, but I chose the Japanese route for the next wedding. I let my daughter plan her own wedding with minimal interference from myself. The mother-in-law, on the other hand, it's always the mother-in-law. Story 25. Oh my god. First off, the bride is angry at me because she has a leftover high school crush on my then-boyfriend, now husband, but at her own wedding. During the vows, her kid keeps getting in between them and pushing the groom backwards while he's reciting the vows. No one does anything. The kid is wearing handcuffs on one wrist. Then the groom gives a speech about how after she messed with all his friends, he thought it was over, but nothing can stop true love. That was his toast to the bride. Then she and her two bridesmaids took turns drinking a bottle, heads back and arms out till it was gone. That was the toast to the groom. Hammered, she just kept heading out to smoke after and trails a lace-carrying waft of smoke throughout the wedding, where she tries to dance super inappropriately with my boyfriend, then passes out and is carried to the bathroom by the new husband and starts roaching down his back and trailing that on the floor while they go off to whatever Love Shack motel had the misfortune. It was my first introduction to my husband's high school friends. Story 26. My husband's cousin got married. Mormon wedding, but heathens attending, so it was an outside wedding. In July. The metal chairs were too hot to sit on, so we all stood for the ceremony. The minister, bishop, priest, spoke at length about how important it was that they balanced their checkbooks, and that now that they were married, they would have children who were blessed and would go to heaven. The issue? The groom's son from a previous relationship was standing right there, his best man. Those same chairs were used for the reception. Still too hot to sit on. Also, I went to one wedding where I sat behind the groom's grandmother. As the bride walked down the aisle, she said, in her I need a hearing aid voice, "I guess you can dress up trash." Story 27. This was in the early 2000s. The male and female attendants were in charge of the buffet meal, refilling serving platters, selling drinks at the bar, etc. The food was all straight out of cans and grocery store containers. Totally budget-friendly. No problem, just not typical. Then the bride and groom had a dollar dance and sacked quite a few bucks for the attendants, making a big deal out of shaking people down for 20s and no bills lower. Before the dancing was allowed to start, the attendants were all sent among the guests to sell 50-50 tickets to benefit the bride and groom. The winner of the 50-50 was pressured into donating their half, over $2,000, back to the newlyweds. So, full-on fundraiser vibe all afternoon and evening. The bridal party took turns playing music from their phones since the couple wouldn't pay for a DJ. The couple divorced within 9 months. Story 28. Went to a wedding where the bride was 45 minutes late. At one point, all the bride and groom's party was just up hanging out with those in the congregation making jokes. One of the bridesmaids called the bride and put her on speakerphone without telling her. The bride demanded loudly for everyone to hear, "I am a princess and this is my day." She was at Walmart getting pictures printed to put on the reception tables. The groom was downstairs, in tears. We played cards upstairs. Almost laughingly, we decided to go to the reception. When we showed up, the reception hall was locked for the first 15 minutes. Almost 2 hours later, the now intoxicated wedding party joined us. They walked in the door carrying 2 new steamers from Walmart and some uncooked bacon, and also had some large Sam's Club-sized cans of green beans. No can opener, though. One of the guests who had been waiting to eat for 2 hours opened the cans of green beans with a Bowie. They're still married 15 years later. Story 29. The worst was when my husband's sister married for the 3rd time. After being badly injured in an accident, she was partially to blame for. Mid-40s, sister-in-law woke up from a coma, considerably thinner, and, thanks to the family working on her behalf, about to win a 7-figure settlement. Sister-in-law literally went from being a welfare lifer to being a millionaire. Did she embrace this incredible second chance? Of course not. We managed to get her to buy a home, and wouldn't you know it, the handyman hired to work around the property found sister-in-law and her money to be irresistible and gave her a sparkling ring that she bought, and they couldn't wait to get hitched. Fast forward a few months and the wedding is being held at a country club. No expense spared. My other sister-in-law did their best to avoid it being a complete crap show, but it was inevitable. Our immediate family, the efficient, and a few family friends were the only people who followed the dress code, semi-formal, and acted appropriately. All of the bride's and groom's friends were there, as well as the groom's extended family, some of whom showed up in sweats. A sundress and flip-flops seemed to count as making an effort. The shenanigans began well before the ceremony. When the groom and his relatives were angry that the bar wasn't open, the bride showed up loaded. Her teen daughter left the reception to do stuff in the parking lot. Guests tried to steal the centerpieces, and the bride and groom had to be poured into their limo at the end. You know it's bad when the officiant leans over and says, "I wonder how long this one will last." Answer: until the money ran out. Story 30. Let's see. Not the worst wedding, but certainly memorable. 3 people got heat stroke and had to leave early to go to urgent care because it was a 100% outside wedding with no tent or shade in triple-digit heat. The caterers decided they hadn't been paid for any dessert services, so they left as soon as dinner was served, and family members were scrambling to serve the many plated desserts. Not a big cake. The best man kept calling the groom sensual instead of sensitive during his speech. Someone relieved themselves in the pool. Half the reception was out of their minds. I think the worst wedding would be the multilingual Catholic wedding I went to that was also 100% outside in triple-digit heat, with no shade structures, and started 2 hours after guests were told to be seated for the ceremony. And then the ceremony lasted 2 hours because everything, including Mass, was said in at least 2 languages. The marriage itself only lasted a year and a half. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.